All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of OSS Power-Ups. Today a bit early, and also I just realized the clocks in the back are ringing on the hour. So welcome to OSS Power-Ups. Today we have a very special guest. It's Simon with his project Verify, but you may also may know Simon from some other projects. But before we start, a few things first. Yeah, exactly. A few things first. I should also disable my notifications. And that is how sorry, I missed the focus. A few things first. So if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to ask them in the chat on the right. I would try to ask Simon as we go. If the questions don't fit, we will address them either afterwards, or you may even ping Simon on Twitter. This webinar is going to be recorded. It will also be immediately available, so to say. So if at any point you need to stop for a moment, get some water or something, just hit the pause button and continue when you're back. Other than that, I also want to give you a brief introduction, as always, how this format came about. So if we look at OSS open source development in the .NET community, then what we see is that organizations largely benefit from open source projects, but unfortunately, in return, the contributions are rather insufficient. And you particularly know that if you follow a couple of popular persons, popular people, like for instance, Aaron Stannard, for instance, is a great voice around that. So definitely give him a follow and read a bit more on his blog. And therefore, I think we can say that sustainability is a large problem in the .NET space. Hence, we also stream this on the .NET Foundation channel. So also give them a follow if you're watching on their stream. You probably have already. And with that, we can also conclude that maintainers are at risk because they're pretty much on their own and have all the big work to do on their own, like triaging issues. Sometimes you don't even get friendly issues, rather root issues. They have to update documentation that we then, as consumers, often don't even read, and so on. Plenty of stuff. So it's really a lot. And we, in our advocates, or not just advocates, but also general in our .NET team at JetBrains, we were thinking, how can we help the community a bit? And what came out was the OSS Power-Ups. And we wanted to have a program where we sponsor individuals or projects with $100 for a month for over a year. Also, that's the second part. We want to give those maintainers a platform and raise awareness that they, have accept contributions in certain areas, or that they are open for sponsorships, etc. And most importantly, and for me always the very fun part in this is we also want to share our strengths, which is particularly with profiling, for instance. So if you know Martin from my team, he is a pro with profiling via memory and all these things. Khalid is a very virtuose graphic designer and already has helped a couple of projects to design logos and some material that they can tweet and stuff like that. And my area is something like in the CI space, and also plugins. That counts for all of us, I think. And let's go back for a moment. Plugins is again, this is very fun for me, is again on the table for today. But now I will also bring in Simon. Let's see where Simon is. And we will have a little talk before we start. Hello, Simon. I hope you're well.
Everyone. I'm good, thank you.
All right. So you are one person in the .NET space, I have to say. I mean, you're like contributing to probably every open source project that is on Earth, right?
I try and contribute at least something to every project that I'm actually consuming, be it consuming from my open source into my open source projects, or consuming in a work perspective. And if I'm consuming from a work perspective, I try and also contribute some money back as well. But that's kind of where it started. And I also find it fairly relaxing to go and, you know, open up a new code base and explore it and try and understand what they're doing and the patterns and practices they're using. And usually I find a few things to fix and tinker with and push them back up on a pull request. And I think I've got about a, I don't know, 90% hit rate on pull requests. You know, a few of them don't hit the mark, but doing okay.
Yeah, but I'm always astonished. I mean, you sometimes also share the amount of projects you contribute to. In the recent time, there was also my project, and I actually also do this. Like when people use my project to just go through the repositories and help with, you know, better usages of the tool, etc. But yeah, you have a lot of projects at your hand, basically. I do remember you must have started also with Git version, or you were involved in it, right? And also Fody, many people will know.
Fody's probably the most well-known one. Git version had some traction as well. I've also tinkered with nsubstitute, and
I'm still using Git version, so there's that. Also, and I told you the story before, and I sorry, I have to tell it. So Git version is actually the project how we met, and that is, well, looking back, I'm not exactly proud, or I could have done better. Actually, it was like in 2013 or something, and I just discovered Git version. And I was like, I read on different, you know, websites and found out, okay, there's a setting I didn't like in Git version. I thought it might be better from what I read, that it should be changed. Yeah. And that was also at the very beginning of my career. And I found that you are maintaining or something, found your Skype account. I messaged you, and I got like, I was still awake at 4 o'clock in the morning. and as usual. and I do remember you actually took a lot of time explaining, but I was very, how can I say, I was very strong. Like, I wanted to push my argument that it should be changed. And looking back, I feel really bad about this. But you actually took the time, and that's just, it's an interesting point for me, because I was just a stranger for you back then. Yeah, I may be still, I don't know, but you took the time explaining things to someone on the internet. You tried to help. I wasn't exactly in the open source mindset yet, I would say. I hope I was still friendly, but you said you don't have any bad memories.
I don't have any bad memories at all of that one. You know, I guess if we get helped on a Skype call and had a conversation, there was, you know, I think your idea must have had merit to, I mean, even if we didn't go that way in the end. But yeah, it's nice that you actually had a positive experience there, and hopefully it, you know, encouraged you to get more involved. So
totally. Just I realized that it probably takes a bit of time learning that. I mean, I never tried to be a bad person about it or something, you know. But it's something. Yeah, maybe I didn't think for a moment, but yeah, maybe we just need to educate people. You know, I also had and I will put this in here. I also had this experience, and I told you also before, where someone was sharing some bad cases on Reddit. And I was saying, okay, this is just the way how maintainers work, and they immediately close the issue and wait for the creator to respond instead of answering and closing sometime later. And I explained briefly, and they said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then they went back and gave an apology for that. And so there is space to also bring people on the better side of, you know what I mean. All right.
Yeah, it is an interesting conundrum, because I have, you know, good days and bad days where you get frustrated with interactions, and
yeah.
But yeah, hopefully I'm more approachable, on the more approachable side than the less approachable. But one point on Git version, I should give credit where it's due. I dropped out of that project probably after about a year, and Jake Ginnivan, I think his name is, has picked up for most of it. And since then, it's a lot of other people have contributed. So it's not something I'm actively in anymore.
Yeah, yeah. But also you brought you brought a lot of good ideas also to the table. Like like your stuff, what you did for Fody, this Patreon thing. Maybe you explain it.
Yeah,
in short, if that's possible.
Yeah, sure. OSS maintainability is a difficult problem, and mostly it boils down to time and essentially money to have people contribute, to get those maintainers to keep on contributing and to keep projects alive. Most of the big projects that are successful have a fair proportion of core maintainers who are paid to work on those projects. That doesn't work for we have a lot of very small projects around there that don't draw those kinds of dollars from big companies. So with 30, I experimented with a kind of a stronger approach of you must be a financial contributor to use 30, and that it says that in the for some licensing pages, and that's sometimes enforced, sometimes not, and it's about $3 a month per developer. Sorry, it is $3 a month per developer, so it's not much money, and that's worked out pretty well. We've got me and two other guys who are core contributors to it, and we make a couple $100 a month out of it. I would say it's still operating at a loss, because it takes a couple $100 doesn't buy you many hours of a developer's time, and I'm probably still spending more hours than I'm getting out of it maintaining it. But it was an interesting experiment with some limited success. I don't plan to apply it to any other projects, just because it's a lot of work to set up and maintain and communicate to people, and also you get a fair bit of negative pushback from people when they discover that they should be paying for software. So yeah.
I'm still waiting for the GitHub option that you can turn on issues only for sponsors. That would be great.
Yeah, it'll be interesting and very controversial if they do that.
Well, you can also turn off issues completely. So that's something in between, right?
Yeah. Yeah, people have talked about various approaches, but I think any path forward has to be has to be enabled by the big players in open source. Otherwise, it's very ad hoc and crippled. The one you mentioned about having people pay to be able to open issues, or have people be able to pay to use a NuGet package and have that build through GitHub. All of those options are on the table and make some kind of sense, but you need the big players in there to enable those scenarios. It's not something individuals, I think, can achieve on their own.
Yeah. Well, what I also did, and I have to give a little thank you for that too. I copied part of your issue templates, which are very great, because basically they're saying, hey, if you're not following the issue template, let's say, then it will be closed immediately. Don't take offense, because it's just a time management thing. Yeah, I'm bad at formulating things like that. And I also included, and I think that works pretty well since then, I also included any feature requests and low impact bug. All those things, they require sponsorship, and everything that is like very high impact, of course, in that case, I'm thankful if someone creates an issue about that, and I will also not ignore it. And that works pretty well for me. So the issue wave has decreased since then, definitely, and I'm pretty happy with that, because it removes a bit of pressure and made it also a bit more fun over time. Okay, but now I would say we switch to your screen.
Okay.
And talk a bit about Verify, which I also started using very recently. Are you ready to have your screen shared?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. So there it is. And as always, I will stay on the stream and ask my stupid questions.
Fair enough. Just to reiterate, if anyone has any questions at any point in time, please shoot through the comments and ask the questions, because if I'm moving too fast at anything, I've been doing this stuff for quite a while, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I don't know that I'm moving too fast effectively. So yeah, please ask questions at any point in time. So snapshot testing is something that most people would be familiar with. We have a little diagram here. So boy, that's not down there. Let me open that again. So this is the traditional approach to snapshot testing. The name of the files that result from a snapshot by convention, so different tools use different conventions. Verify uses the approach of verified file and received file, where the verified file is the one that you assert against. It's the one that you check into source control, and the received file is a temporary file that is the current output of any given test. So when you run a test, there's two workflows. If there's an existing snapshot file, so we'll go with, if there's not an existing snapshot file, you immediately fail the test. And then there's some mechanism for accepting that received file. If you accept that received file, that becomes the verified file. And if not, you discard it and go back and manipulate the test again. If there is an existing verified file, those two files are compared. If they're the same, the test is passed. If they're different, the test fails. And then you've got to go through that same approach of, do we accept the new file or do we want to keep the old file? So that's a bit of a mouthful. Let's just go and show a given test. So what I'll be doing here is, this is a working sample that I'll share a link with Matthias at the end. It's all existing running code. So what I'll be doing is, in some cases, undoing parts of the code and then redoing them to illustrate how it works. So in this case, we're going to have because with traditional snapshot testing, people are used to effectively a screenshot, so it's an image. The easiest way to demonstrate this on a Windows machine is to actually have a Windows format that you can take a snapshot of a given form. So I will just delete this and delete our test. And also delete the verify bits. Okay. So here we have sorry, I'll just run the app first to show you what it looks like. It's just a very basic calculator app. It's nothing special there, just so that we can show how some semi-complex form would be rendered. So with verify, it's deployed as a NuGet package. So if I just come in here, there's a specific NuGet package for verifying against NuGet, xUnit, MSTest. So we'll pull in the, in this case, I'm using NUnit. Install that. And also for each, it's a plugin based model. So if you're verifying against Windows Forms or WPF or Blazor or any other tooling, each of those have their own plugin. In this case, since we're doing Windows Forms, I'll pull in verify WinForms. Now, most of the add-ins to verify operate on a enabling basis. It's mostly the settings that's done as a static state. So you enable them globally for a given project. So the easiest way to do that is with a oh, that's not right. We'll just put a module initializer in here.
Actually, the first time I by myself used the module initializer. So you're also adopters. You will also teach a couple of new C# features, right?
Yeah. So module initializers came in C#8, I think.
I think 9.
9.
Huh? Yeah.
Yeah. So the attribute is only exposed in, I think, Net Core. So it's exposed in Net Standard 2.1 and Net Core, but you can actually use module initializers in any .NET framework all the way back. You just add a fake initializer attribute into your project, and C#9 will find that in that older, Net 4.7 project and detect it and initialize it at module startup. So this approach can be used in, any kind of legacy framework as well.
So it's like a static constructor for a class, just for the assembly, right? So it will be executed before any other code will be executed.
Yeah. So every level has a static initializer. So there's so you have, it goes module initializer, then static class initializer, and then instance class initializer is the kind of hierarchy there. And module initializers have been in the IL spec since, I assume, since .NET was released. They just weren't exposed. So we'll enable that. So when you actually run verify, it's got a pretty simple entry point. You just call verify on whatever instance you want to verify on a snapshot test. I'll do on one. Since verify talks a lot to the file system with its snapshot testing and comparison of files, the whole stack is async all the way down. So we need to await that. Okay, and that's it. If I call this now, so we're to the point where we can actually run the test. So if I run that, so behind the scenes, this is actually spinning up a new instance of the Windows app and doing the comparison. It's where you wonder why it's taking so long. very interesting.
What's happening? Still executing.
Yeah. Not sure why.
Let's try to reboot. Also, this is typical for any demo.
Well, no, I should say that I'm running the preview of Visual Studio and the preview of ReSharper here. So, oh, I know what it is.
I'm glad to hear.
No, that's not it.
I'm still running.
The demo got through against me.
I haven't used ReSharper for a long time. I don't even know this anymore. No, it's still great, but
let me bring my old code back.
Also with Visual Studio, of course. But nowadays, I'm completely on Mac.
I've already been reprimanded for using Rider, not using Rider. Okay, so we've got our code back.
Lucky. So what
I know what the problem is. It's because I'm not using an STA thread. So usually when you do testing against Windows Forms, you need to make sure it's a single threaded application, which I haven't got there. But if I do a return instead of an await, it'll work for now. I won't bother putting there's an attribute you can put on tests to make it STA. So I'll just show that again now that it's actually working.
That sounds like a pretty good case for an analyzer, by the way.
Yeah, it would if you're newing up any kinds of forms in here. It'd be nice to actually prompt you that you're doing.
Yeah, anything that originates from system. What's the assembly called? System Windows Forms or something.
Yeah.
And then require return with task.
So what's happened is we've hit the difference. Just going to get that image up again. So we've hit does a verified file exist? No, and it's failed the test. So we're down in this phase here. Do we accept the new file? So as part of verify, it understands difference tools. So whether it's, I like Beyond Compare, which is shown now, but it also works with Rider and about 15 other difference tools on Windows, Linux, and Mac. And it also selects what the best difference tool is for a given file. So in this case, it's discovered Beyond Compare on my system. It knows that Beyond Compare is good at comparing PNG files, so it's used that to show you the diff. So in this case, it's saying, this is the received file, this is the verified one, we don't have a existing file, and this is the difference down here, or the result of the comparison. And in this case, it's just overlaid the received on the verified, and we get this one. So now you need to decide if you want to accept this or not. Now, this is where you jump out of the test ecosystem a bit, because out of the box, there's no way to, inside here, there's no way to accept that change. So the default behavior of verify is to place a command in the clipboard that accepts that. So what's happened is when we've come down and we've failed this test at this point, verify has placed a command in the clipboard, as the output says, and you can use that command in a console to accept file. So if I accept, so Beyond Compare has detected that that file's changed. I can close that. And now if I run, this passes. And that's because when I accepted that file, it placed the snapshot file into the project down here. Now, if we just run that again, because that process can be a bit confusing. So I've deleted the snapshot file. I run this again. I'll just close Beyond Compare for now. So you'll see under here that when it's in the failed state, there's a received file which has the actual content in it. There's a verified file, which is a dummy file. It's effectively a 1 pixel PNG, and that's required because most diff tools require the 2 files to exist when they do the comparison. So when I place that command in the clipboard, it's overwritten. Let's go back over here. So it's done a move on the received file over to the verified file, effectively accepting that change. Now, the clipboard's a bit cumbersome because it does blat the existing clipboard that you have. And also when multiple files fail, you get one big clipboard command to accept all of those changes. So if you run 10 tests and all of them fail, you get one command in the clipboard that accepts all those changes. And if you wanted
I find that's very convenient.
Well,
but I know where you're heading.
Some people like it. I've used that approach for a while. The thing that you've got to do is if you have 10 failed and you want to accept some of them, you can use the different diff tools because each diff tool has a way where you can basically say accept the change. So I could have gone into Beyond Compare and accepted multiple changes, or you need to explicitly run each individual the test that you want to run, that you want to accept, and then it will put that clipboard command into the clipboard, and you just run that individual one. So if I fail multiple tests, just run all of those. So you'll see that two tests have failed, and we have 2 failed snapshots here. And in the clipboard, there was 2 commands. So that's a little bit cumbersome. So the tool that I use to kind of work around this is called DiffEngineTray. So it's a .NET, it's deployed as a .NET tool. So if I just install that and then run it, now this will override the clipboard. So if I rerun this test, I'm just going to have a note here for me. So it doesn't get me on the next demo. If I rerun this and then paste, that's the command from before. It hasn't put the command for this one into the clipboard. So it hasn't blatted the clipboard. It still remains from when we had the previous 2 files failed. But down here, we actually have a little tray engine here. So you can see this is the solution. You can see that there's one pending move, and here's the file here. So down here, I can now accept this move. I can reopen it in a diff tool, or I can open the directory and have a look at it. And there's also the discard option where you can discard it. So if I accept that change, so you notice that it closed Beyond Compare. I'll just show you that behavior again. So what I'll do is I'll make multiple fail. So these are some other samples we'll get to in the future. All right, now I run all these. So I think that was, maybe 5 or 6 tests. Okay, so we have 6 diff engines pop up. So you can see all the different changes here. Now this DiffEngineTray allows you to manage those individually. So if I accept that one of those closed, I can accept another one closed. And maybe these other ones aren't correct, so I don't want to accept them for now, and I want to discard all those, and it keeps track of all the diff engines. And that works for multiple different diff engines. So if you're using different apps to do your comparison, it's compatible with multiple different apps. It's not just beyond compare. So now that we're back in if I'll just get back into a testable state.
Does this also mean this DiffEngineTray works if I just execute tests from command line, let's say?
Yes. Yep. So behind the scenes,
That's cool.
it's using, I think, it wasn't Windows pipes. It was one of the other communication mechanisms. But
Channels?
anyway, it's basically, they're two distinctly different processes. You can have multiple different Visual Studio instances open, and it works. You have one instance of DiffEngineTray, it works. It works with Rider. It works with VS Code. So you can use it to accept differences from any of those. On a side note, the DiffEngineTray also works for the snapshot testing that comes with Shouldly, and it also works with the snapshot testing that comes with approval tests. So it's compatible with those different tools. So you can have the same workflow of running tests, having multiple fail, and picking and choosing which ones to accept.
By the way, this was one reason why I ultimately had to move, actually, because I was starting using approval tests, and they have this I don't know, issue. And yeah, bad me, I also never cared diving in, but they have an issue with line endings, and starting with moving cross-platform, .NET moving cross-platform, this was open forever, but I didn't manage getting time on my hands to dive in the code base.
Yeah, it's a hard one to crack, especially when different people's Git settings can mean that even within the same project, different files between different OSs on the same project can have different line endings. So when you're doing the comparison, you've got to, effectively ignore line endings. And I should say that's one of the points I'll get to later. There's a few things that snapshot testing is not good at, and line endings is one of them. If you care about line endings in your output, as in you explicitly want, let's say you have a text file, and but one line ending has to be, a new line, and another line ending has to be a carriage return. I don't know why you'd want that, but snapshot testing a text file like that would be, snapshot testing isn't good for that, because it just gets very difficult to ensure that the snapshot file, when it moves into source control and back out of source control in another system, has the correct line endings that you expect. Anyway, so let's see. We're back in a green state here. I'll just rerun all of those tests. Okay, so we went through, that was all the path to get along the top line. So we went no, fail the test, accept the new file, yes, move received to verified. So that took us down this path here. So if we now go down there's an existing file, which is here. And let's say we want to make a change to our form. Please wait. Now I'm going to make it doesn't really matter what the change is here. I'm just going to delete that button. It's pretty obvious that this is a bug. And we can see that fairly clearly. But if you're looking at complex web applications where you might be concerned about alignments or various other things, or the size of how things dock when they're various resolutions. It can be a bit harder to work out what is a bug and what is by design. So if I now rerun these tests,
I was actually expecting that this has the left to right property set, or how is it called when it goes the other direction?
The numbers are the wrong way. Look, I just downloaded I googled calculated Windows Forms and just dumped it in there because it didn't really matter what the content was. It was just something that I could change.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, so this is the result you get here. So it's gone down the path of, we have an existing file, we've compared them, they're different, we've failed the test, and now we're in this situation of accepting or declining it. So this is the same as when you have an assert that fails. So you've done a bunch of code changes, you have an assert that fails. Now, the outcome of that assert can be one of two things. The assert is correct and the code is wrong, or the assert is wrong and the code is correct. So in a traditional assertion approach, you would either go back and fix the code and rerun it, or you would fix the assert and to make the test pass. So in snapshot testing, if it's a bug, what we would do is, we would discard this, we'd go and fix the form, and we'd rerun the test, and hopefully it's green again. But if the change is correct, we'll run it again. So for some reason, I don't know why you want that button removed, but let's say it is correct, and we come down.
Who needs the 7?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's for some reason someone doesn't like it and it's an unlucky number, but I can accept that change and have a new verified file has the 7 removed and the test passes. So there's a good side effect here that I should point out, that when you're dealing with complex UI design, for every test that you have, and you have tests for multiple different scenarios, in here I could set some button to be pressed and snapshot test it. I could change the resolution and snapshot test it. And you have all these different scenarios, and each of those scenarios gives you a snapshot file. Snapshot files get checked into source control, which means over time, you then suddenly have not just the code that is the definition of how those forms look, but you also have snapshot tests that evolve over time that can show you that, given any change set through history, how the code changed and how that looked different in the UI. So you can switch through, you can go through your Git history and you can see all those different snapshot tests for different scenarios, and even have conversations with non-technical people, because if you're looking at code-based asserts, that doesn't really mean much to, say, a graphic designer. But when you actually have snapshots, you can just point them to the code or get them to have a look at those snapshots, and they can make decisions on whether that does look correct or doesn't. So you get a bit more involvement with non-technical members of the team. So that's just a side effect.
Simon, we have one very good question, actually. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Ravindu is asking, does the snapshot of a form adopt the visual style of the platform it's being tested on? So I guess the question is around how exactly is the capturing or the screenshotting of the form implemented, I guess.
Yeah. That's a good question. It is platform specific, and it can also be resolution specific, and even cross-platform. So let's say OS specific, specific version within an operating system, even a specific version of a .NET runtime can affect those snapshots. So there's a few ways you can do that with and most of them are technology specific. So if you're looking at WPF, the solutions are different from Windows Forms, but there is some stuff in, for example, WPF, where you can say render in, non-OS styling. So you get a kind of a bit more of a consistent snapshot as a result. You can also have multiple different versions so you can have multiple snapshot files for any given scenario. So if I did unique for OS platform and unique for, it's probably architecture is probably a better one here. So now when I run this, I was going to demo this later, but we'll jump into it now. So you can notice here that in the snapshot file name, it includes x86. So this is our old snapshot file. I can get rid of that one because we've now made it unique for architecture. So if I were to change this test to have multiple different runs where I can run it against 64 and 32, I get different results for different runtimes. So if I did in here, let's just do, I think I've got next six on this machine. This is where you regret using a preview when the demo gods frees up your instance. It should be fine if I just rerun. So that's just restored the bin and obj directory for net6. I'll get rid of this. Okay, so if I say unique for runtime and version, and I think I just selected one runtime, not two. Let me rerun all of those against all runtimes.
I'm actually sorry, go on.
You notice over here that the snapshot file we got when I opened the net5 says .net5_0. So when it runs against net6, okay, so now we've got two. So what's happened is we've had it fail on two runtimes, right? So this is, I've got my grouping wrong here, but anyway, one of these is net5 and one of these is net6. We've got a snapshot file for net5 and a snapshot file for net6. Now these compound, so you can have unique for runtime, you can have unique for operating system, etc., etc. And then all of those uniqueness combine to give you a unique snapshot file for that specific combination.
That sounds so cool, because I imagine if let's say if you just added .NET 6, let's say, and you have a bunch of tests, then you do this just in your test project, add the new target framework, and you run it. You get all the failing tests. You go through all the images, basically, you can accept them, and that's it.
Yeah,
right? And hopefully without bugs.
Yeah, well, you can. Usually, it's a scenario where you want to support multiple runtimes in a scenario, and often the output can be different for different runtimes. So if you're inside the web space, you might have a different snapshot file per browser. So you want a snapshot for Chrome, a snapshot for Edge, a snapshot, etc., because the rendering of those different browsers is slightly different. So that's effectively the same problem as running on different OS, because there's some differences in them. The other approach so that's the uniqueness approach. The other approach is in the form of scrubbers. So a scrubber works when we have, just after we've run the test and before we do the comparison, a scrubber runs on that file, and you get an a chance to manipulate that file in any way you want. So let's say you have something in your snapshot file that is localized per culture, and you don't care what it is as long as it is there, but you don't want it for your test to fail when someone runs it on a computer with different language. So a scrubber allows you to replace that with something that will be consistent between those different runs. There's a third option, which is the comparison. So you can actually plug in to verify and override the default compare for different files. So this doesn't work very well in the PNG file, because it would be pretty difficult to write something that can work out if a Windows Forms app works correctly between, you've got a snapshot file for a Windows form on one OS and you've got the same file from a different OS. It would be hard to compare those programmatically and brush over the fact that the differences are only OS specific. But it is very helpful in other scenarios when you're not doing image files, but you're actually doing other text-based files or files that can be more manipulated in a structured way. So, Word documents or text files or XML, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that answered the question.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, I'll just...
We also just got the reply. Interesting.
Was that Indu?
Ravindu said that.
Yes. She's trolling me, I think.
They followed up. Did you also mention that it might vary by screen resolution, DPI, etc.? But yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so you can put uniqueness constraints on screen resolutions of various other things, but you do get to the point of diminishing returns for more complex scenarios. So sometimes snapshot testing of UIs just gets too difficult to actually do the compare. There is another approach that you can use in the comparison plugin scope. Verify allows multiple different add-ins to override how comparison works. So there's a few different algorithms that when you're doing image comparisons, you can do slightly lossy comparisons. So it helps brush over off by a few pixels or rendering issues between different OSs. So one of the algorithms is Phash, PHASH, I think it is. And there's another one, there's a few different algorithms that come with image magic tooling. So Verify has plugins for those, so you can ignore smaller differences and only break the test when it's actually a more significant change. And I'll get to those in a little bit.
You have thought of everything.
Well, I've used this in anger on literally several hundred projects. I've used it at various different employers over the years. I maintain, 100-odd projects that, from my personal perspective, over all different technologies. So it has been battle tested, and there's a lot of different scenarios that I've made it work for. And it's one of the other reasons I actually go and, it's a bit, I guess it's a bit on the nose, but sometimes I pick up someone's project and plug in one of my tools into that project just to see how it would actually work. And is there any scenarios? Yeah, so are there any scenarios that I haven't thought of to make it work for this project? And if sometimes I submit PRs for those changes, and some people like it, some people don't, but it does allow me to verify that different scenarios are actually supported.
But definitely we can put the check mark for production ready. We can do that.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I can confirm. I can vouch for it.
Okay, so one other thing that I forgot there was when you're doing snapshot testing with Verify, received files are considered a temporary file. So you should exclude them from your source control, in this case, by putting a git ignore in, so that all received files are ignored. You could limit that to just the test directory if there's conflicts. But yeah, you don't want to accidentally check them in because it's just noise. Okay. So one of the things that we did there was that was a traditional snapshot test. You're snapshotting a UI, and that the result of that is an image, and you're doing a comparison of different images. So that's what most people are used to when they think snapshot testing. It's for, I guess, Jest is one of the more common, more popular ones, and that's how most people are using Jest to do snapshot testing. So there's an interesting concept that you should consider, though, that when you screenshot an UI, all you're effectively doing is serializing the state of that UI to disk. And then you're comparing the serialized result on disk to another serialized result. So if you apply that concept of snapshot testing is just comparing something that's been serialized to disk, that opens a whole nother bag of options for us. So if we have a look at, I'll just quickly show the result here, and then I'll go through and do a bit more coding. So if I just delete the result and run the test, you're going to need a faster machine.
Everyone needs that.
Okay, so in this case, we've actually serialized a .NET object onto disk, and we're doing a comparison of that serialized content. In this case, we're using JSON. So this means that any .NET object or structure or anything in memory can be serialized. Usually text is the most versatile one because it's easy to understand, it's small, it's easy to see the differences. But you can serialize any instance of any object to any outcome format on disk and then compare those changes. So I'll just take a step back and show how that would be done. So here we've got a traditional assert. I've got to remind myself not to zoom out so I can see more on the screen. So run this, obviously it all passes when my machine doesn't lock up.
This question also just popped up in on Reddit the other day, and the person was asking for a way to better structure assertions because the way it currently is implemented is, let's say the given name doesn't equal Emmy, but also the family name is wrong. Then you would need to execute your test twice and have 2 cycles or iterations of updating the expected outcome, right?
Yep, and continue for how many asserts you have. Yeah, the snapshot testing does plaster over that problem because you assert the entire result at one time. So just to show you the code we're asserting against, it's just a fake database effectively returning something in memory. So you can think of your, anyone who's testing against EntityFramework, for example, would have some kind of structure that returns things from a service. So if I was to convert these asserts over to snapshot testing, change that to a task, and then I'll just put it down here for now. And run it. So this is a good approach when you're doing converting over to using snapshot testing, is to leave all your asserts in place and then run the snapshot test just to see what the outcome is. Okay, that's expected. So I mentioned that Verify has different plugins for different testing frameworks. So to plug into the xUnit ecosystem, xUnit requires an attribute at the test level. So that, as it's explained in it, you'll see the little expected to define a user's verify in the test class. So we just add that up here. And rerun. Okay. Okay, so here's our diff. Let's pull that over to the side, pull that up. So there's a few things to note here. It's done as a JSON serialization, as you saw earlier. By default, there's a few different things that I mentioned scrubbers earlier that look into how things are actually, before they're actually written to disk, you can manipulate them in a way so that it makes a consistent run. There's a few default scrubbers that come out of the box. One of those is GUIDs are automatically scrubbed, IDs are automatically scrubbed, date times, and a few others as well. So when these scrubbers work, they replace it with a known token. So in this case, it's hit the first date time, it's given date time 1, it's hit the first GUID, and it's given GUID 1. Now it does that so that if you use the same GUID or the same date time in other places inside the serialization, you can see that those things match up. But it means that the next time you run it, because you often have a different date time or a different GUID, those things won't break the test because of, different data. So there's, in here, you'll notice there's a few things that are problematic, and I'll just accept that and show those changes. So we've accepted the first run, but the next time we actually run it, it's going to fail because there's some data that is inconsistent between multiple different test runs.
The age looked weird.
So there you go. So obviously the person's now older. So in this case, the traditional way that people would do this in assertion-based testing would be, you inject something into your service, into the tests that allow you to manipulate what date time now is, and you use that instead of date time now in your service. Often that does work, but it's often not required. And in this case, we don't necessarily care what the age is in the snapshot, because we can actually leave the assert in here. So if I just say, modify serialization, and I'll fix all the indenting in a second. I'll just ignore the age. It's, it's a Fluenty UI, so that's, make that a bit more readable. Okay. So now if I run that, now it's going to fail again because I've omitted the age. So we need to accept that change in the result. I should also note you could, at any point in time, you can go and change snapshot files manually. So you can do the inverse, where if you know what the result should look like, you can actually manipulate any given snapshot file to the way it should look, and then go and make the code match that snapshot file. So you have your red-green refactor scenario. I generally find that it's just easier to manipulate your code and change and have it generate the snapshot file, and you either accept or decline at each point in time. So you can see here we've removed the age. Okay, let's accept that. So in that snapshot file, we verified the ID, we verified it wasn't null, family name, the description I'll leave there for now. We verified date of birth, and we verified the address. Okay, so in this case, we want to leave the verification of age there because we've excluded that from a snapshot. So just so you don't break the code that does the age, works out the age, we'll leave this one here. The description is a bit more interesting because it's got an inline GUID here. Now, in our test, it's kind of working because I've faked the data up and I'm always using a consistent ID. But usually when you're in a real test scenario, IDs change. So let's say you're testing against EntityFramework, you add a new entity to the data context, and then you do some, run a report, and that report would have the ID, the dynamic ID that was generated at the time it was added. So this would change and it would break our test. So in this case, we can, at the top level, scrub inline GUIDs. So what this does is it actually looks through the different properties during serialization, and it will try and find any instance of this GUID inside the text and do the token replacement. It's easier if I just show that.
It's interesting because I had some kind of tunnel view maybe in this. It's the first time I see this approach being used in combination with usual code as test. You know what I mean? I mean, what I did previously was deleting all the assertions that I had and completely replacing them with snapshot testing. Now you're making this middle or compromise, let's say, and you can have both. Yeah, I think that's worth to point out. Actually, you don't have to implement everything with the snapshot testing, but you can also leave some stuff as code maybe, if you want.
It's not. I'll say it's not common, but it is definitely useful. So there's this scenario where the age generation, I kind of contrived that a bit to show this scenario of leaving an assertion in there. There's a few other common ones where range comparisons. So if you want to say, this date time is within these two ranges, you can't snapshot test that because no matter what, that the actual value is changing. So you can't write the value to the result. So you have to leave that as an assert. There's a few other cases as well, but it's good to remember that it's not a full replacement for assertions. And in some cases, certain types of tests, snapshot testing is just not a good idea, full stop. So it's not something that you come in and, if you've got a really large number of tests, then I'd probably say maybe 90% of those are probably good candidates for snapshot tests. There's a few others. Like another example is if you are doing any kind of performance analysis, writing the snapshot file and comparing them and doing all that stuff, it does add a bit of time. So if you have a really large number of tests and you want to be able to run them really quickly, you're talking, tens of thousands of tests. Snapshot testing will slow that test run down. So you've got to evaluate whether it works for your scenario or not.
Not to compare hundreds of thousands of JSON data.
Yeah.
By the way,
I'll just give that back up. If you see here, it's done the token replacement of the GUID when I scrub the inline GUID, and it's replaced it with the as I mentioned before, the same token that it's used for your ID. So it's doing a sensible scrubbing in that it knows it'll keep count of different values as it goes through and scrub those with sensible replacements. Cool.
Looks good. But by the way, we have 2 questions.
Yep.
To look fit. Yeah. One question was, I suppose a snapshot test can be used as golden master test, correct?
It's a different name for the same approach, effectively. I don't think there's significant differences between the two, but I should point out that people are avoiding using the phrase golden master just because of the connotations to slavery. So it's generally not something that you'll hear phrased in that way. There's another name that people are using for it these days, but I forget what that is.
We use just gold test. That's the name how I got to know it internally. So just gold test.
Yep.
A second question was, am I right that in case of setup verify and run tests with some CI tool, these failed files have to be stored as build artifacts?
Yeah. So the verify is aware of CI tooling. It's aware of, I don't know, the top 6 or 7 CI toolings. And it won't pop up the diff file when you have those failures on your server. Obviously, it's, you're running it unattended. There's no one to actually look at those difference files anyway. And yes, you do need to include those artifacts as assets in the result. So if something does break, you want to be able to download those files and compare them locally. And there is documentation that I can point to that shows how to do that for, what have I got up there? AppVeyor. I think I've got GitHub Actions and Azure, what's it called? DevOps.
Azure Pipelines.
Azure Pipelines? No.
Yeah,
okay, Azure Pipelines, yep. Yeah, so there's some doco on how to do that, but it's not too difficult. You're basically putting a wildcard in your assets for any, star receive star, include those as assets.
Yeah, there's a follow-up question for that. And after build is finished, can I manually inspect fails with DiffEngineTray engine? In other words, are there any pitfalls in case of using it with CI? So I guess that's not implemented, right?
No, you can't.
DiffEngineTray is not downloading the.
No. But that's an interesting problem to go and try and solve. But no, currently there's no server integration. So
not undoable though.
Yeah, no, not impossible. But at the moment, it's just single machine communication between those two services. While I'm here, I realized I didn't actually say this before. There's some shortcuts in DiffEngineTray that allow you to automatically accept or decline or whatever different changes. So there's two. The one I usually use is accept all open. So when you actually run snapshot tests and you have multiple different diff engines pop up, by default it's limited to, I think it's 5 diff engines, 5 instances of Diff Tools popping up. And the reason for that is if you have, say, 1,000 tests that fail, you don't want to launch 1,000 instances of some UI comparison tool on your system because it will just grind it to a halt. So there's a configurable number that you can set that to that defaults to 5. So sometimes you'll have 10 tests that fail, and you'll gradually work through those in multiple runs. So you can usually I look through those 5, they look all good. I do Control-Alt-A, it accepts all the snapshots that are currently open in Diff Tools. All of those will close, and I'll just rerun the tests to pop up the different ones, and then I can continue doing that. And you can manually open and accept changes in DiffEngine if you want. But that's kind of my workflow. So it's nice to have those options here. There's also an accept all hotkey, which will accept all the pending diffs, even if they are not currently open in a diff tool. And that works for some people's workflows because you can always go and look at those pending changes inside your source control tool. Cool.
I think that's a good point where I can also show the plugin that we did.
Sure.
Let me find where I share my screen. I actually do share my screen already. So now you should see it, right? Yeah. So this is really just a demo solution for me to use. So you won't see anything too exciting here. But we do have one fact, so which is like a normal test case, and one theory. Those also work. So you briefly showed that, which works similar for the platform, which then appends .NET 5.
I'll show parameterized tests after this, but yeah.
Sorry, but we don't. We will see how much more time we have. But anyways, we have a couple of tests now, and you see when I execute them, those will actually throw some verify exceptions. And let's see what happens. Just to that it's not an image what I'm showing here. And what we do is what we did is now on right click, you have these two options to accept the received or compare the received and verified. So accept received, or in other words, compare received and verified, which is basically opening the Diff tool. That is only available in Rider. We will see currently. We will see how we can implement that also in for ReSharper, but should be doable because we can just use Simon's infrastructure for that. But yeah, let's just do this. So when I click accept received, you also see that the test will turn to outdated, which means now if I execute it, it will hopefully, be passing. And also, let's actually try the other thing: compare received and verified, and then you will see the diff comparison inside Rider, and the usual way how you can make adjustments to it, how it's shown, etc. And then basically just, you could accept, save, and close the dialog. In this case, we don't have the marking as outdated yet. May have to research a bit if that's even possible, because we would need a callback, etc. And also, of course, this is very helpful, I guess, if you're pretty sure that all the received files should be accepted. You can even execute that on a top level tree item here. So, for instance, on the full test suite, on the assembly, or the class, wherever you like, it would just iterate all the affected tests and then accept those, right? And now you also see now those two are marked as outdated. We can execute again. And they should pass, hopefully. Yes. And just in case you have never installed any plugins, so this is available from today already for ReSharper and Rider from the marketplace. And you can see it listed as verify support. And not yet for the EAP version. But yeah, I don't know. Simon and I, we may have another talk about what we could adjust. But you can just use it and let us know what you think.
Yeah, so this is effectively an alternative or a replacement for DiffEngineTray. And the reason it's a better approach is it is contextual to the actual tests you're running. So you do the right click on a given test. There's no mental mapping of knowing what the snapshot file looks like in DiffEngineTray and mapping that back to what test it corresponds to. So it is better in some ways than DiffEngineTray. The other thing that's really interesting about it is it's going to be cross-platform. So DiffEngineTray is currently only on Windows, but with this add-in, you can be using Rider on Mac and have a much cleaner experience.
Yeah, I also think, I mean, I've implemented plugins for a couple of projects here already, but this one is the first I will definitely use on a regular basis. So yeah,
I'll be using it.
I'm really glad also that it worked out in that way, because I mean, for those that don't have any experience with plugins, but there are some moving parts basically in there. You have to also communicate with different processes. I had to write some Kotlin also again, and I'm definitely not a JVM type of person.
Well, you realize now that you've done this for Verify, you're going to have to do it for approval tests and for Shoodly as well.
Yeah, I can do this. Actually, we can. I think we can. We just have to find a compromise about the icons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I realize we're running a bit late on time. There's a couple more things I'd like to run through. I'll just do it really quickly.
Yeah, let me share your screen again.
Yep.
It's back on.
Okay, so I'm going to play in the browser space this time. So these tests run a bit slow because you're actually automating a browser up. Before I was showing you I showed you both snapshot testing of an image and snapshot testing through to text. So it's also important to note that the output of a given test can be multiple files. So this is very useful. In this case, I'm snapshot testing a web page. So the output of a web page, there's multiple valuable parts that we can actually extract from that. We can actually snapshot test for HTML, and we can snapshot the image as well. So here you can see that it's rendered the actual image of a page, but it's also rendered the HTML for us. And those things are convention-based here. So we have, if I just accept that, so you can see it just counts through the different files. So there's any number of files that you can have as an output of a test. This is also very useful when you're doing snapshot testing against reporting-based solutions. So you're generating any kind of document. So if you want to snapshot test a Word document, you can have a PNG per page of the Word document, for an example. As an aside, this is using Playwright to actually do that automation of a browser, and you can do unique per different browsers as well. So you'd have different snapshots for different browsers. Another concept that Verify has is recording. So a lot of times behind the scenes, there's stuff happening that you don't necessarily want to surface as part of the result of a test method. So you're testing a controller, like a web API controller, and it's talking to a database. Now you don't want to pass the results, like what interactions that controller had to the database, but you might want to snapshot test those things into the result, in the resulting snapshot file. So in this case, we have a method that does HTTP calls. Here's the two calls, and it just returns the length of them. It's a pretty basic test, just gives you the size back. So we're going to snapshot test the size of response, which is just an int. But we've also plugged in here, which is an extension, a static extension that starts recording anything that's happening on the current effectively async local thread. So any HTTP calls that happen during this context will be included in the snapshot result. So you can see here we have the result of the size was 95, but then it's also said that you've done multiple HTTP calls to these URLs with these headers, and that's the response. So this is kind of helpful to detect very chatty code. Like if you have some method that you're not sure how many calls it's doing or what it's doing, and you want to make sure that moving forward you want to optimize it so it doesn't make too many calls to either a database or a web service, you can plug in recording and have a look at what it's actually doing, talking to those systems behind the scenes. It's also very helpful for debugging. So often I will turn on recording for either, SQL interactions or web interactions, just so that I can get the snapshot file containing all of those interactions that it had. Because then you can say, oh, what am I missing a header? And actually get an understanding of what it's doing behind the scenes. Once you've debugged it, worked out what the problem is and fixed the bug, you often remove that stuff from the snapshot. And that would just be done by deleting this code. So if you look at the equivalent for talking to SQL Server, here's something that is doing it's just doing a single command, a select execute scalar, and returning the value. But we actually start the recording up here, and you can see that the result here, there's the output of the actual method, and it has the SQL result. If you're doing EntityFramework code, this is really helpful, because on almost every single place I've worked, you just go and find some tests that are talking to EntityFramework, and you stick in start recording, and people are amazed at how many calls and what columns they're returning. So they're either over searching for columns, over returning them, doing full table scans, doing many queries that they didn't expect it was doing. And this lets you visualize that and snapshot that into a result. And I think that's all I was going to go through today, actually. Oh, parameterized testing. I'll just quickly have a look at that. You can see here that you can inline some data. In xUnit, there's no way to pick out the parameters of a given test run. You've got to use parameters extension to pass them through. If there's multiple, you would just pass multiple parameters through. NUnit works out of the box because it has a static state where you can get the parameters out and you don't need the use parameters. And the result is a convention-based snapshot file where it includes a key value pair where it's the name equals the value for each file. And I think that's it.
How do you actually know that the parameter is called value? I mean, or do you just need to pass them in the correct order?
So no, it's you do need to pass them in the correct order. So if I had, 1, 2, int, you do need to pass them in the correct order.
Okay. Then it's clear. Then it's clear. Yeah. I was just thinking maybe you do some magic that I don't know yet.
No, so there is some. There's a bit of magic where xUnit gives you the reflection-based implementation of this method, and that's done through plugging in users verify, and that's how we get the parameter values out when the test is being run.
Okay.
So how that works is specific to the different test frameworks.
Okay, gotcha. Also, sorry. I hope I didn't take too much ahead when I was showing the plugin. I was worrying about the time. I thought after when we had DiffEngineTray.
No, not at all. You know me. I can talk about this stuff for ages. So I guess we should probably wrap it up now, though.
Yeah, probably. I also got to say, the first time I heard you talking about this was on the .NET Rocks show, and I was very excited how many use cases that actually has. Like you have a list of what frameworks and techniques are supported, like you also showed in the webinar today. And I think that was having it not just with audio but video instead was also a great experience, and I hope it helped people. And yeah, we have.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I think we had a couple more. Let me see. There was one question from Stuart. How do you keep on top of all of this and still pay the bills?
A lot of automation, taking consistency to an OCD level. So for all my personal projects, that it's just me running them, I keep it very consistent. I actually pull in I've got a NuGet package that I ship. It's called package defaults, and it has a whole bunch of default approaches to how it should be structured, where the strong name key should be, how to build the NuGet package, all that kind of stuff. So that's all done. And I also have some, there's a templated approach to applying changes to multiple GitHub repos. So you can effectively have a GitHub repository that looks a certain way, and then you can apply those changes in that GitHub repository to any number of other repositories, and you can run as an automated script. I will find the name because it has suddenly dropped off.
I do something similar with the ReSharper writer plugins, and I'm using .NET new templates for that, where it works pretty okay, I'd have to say.
Yeah, but that only works for the first time that you run.
Well, I introduced a couple of parameters so that I can say new and then build only, let's say, and it will only replace the build relevant files, let's say. But yeah, it's definitely room for improvement.
Yeah, so the tool's called, I just shared my screen if you want to give me the usage again. So it's called,
yeah, share it again.
It's called GitHub Sync.
Another project of Simon that I didn't know of.
Yeah, so you spin up a new instance of the sync tool. It's all .NET code, and you can manually add and remove. So you can manually add structures and files, and then add multiple targets with different permissions, and then you can run that. There's also a .NET tool you can run. So I use this. So for all the
can you zoom in a bit, maybe?
Yep. So there's the tool, GitHub Sync, and that's a usage of it there. Right. So you can add sources and targets. So for example, all the plugins to verify, I have a template script that I kind of run and blat different changes down to the different repos. And when it works, you've got a few different options. You can say do a raw commit, so it'll just change it directly. You can say generate a PR and then merge the PR, or you can just say, look, just generate the pull request and let the target person decide if they want to make those changes. So that's often useful if you're not sure, if you might be breaking changes to things, so you want the CI to run before you merge those PRs. So yeah, that's one of the tools I use. And also it helps when you actually, most of the things that I'm actively working on, I use for work. So it's not a matter of I'm not paid to maintain any of this stuff. If I do need a specific feature while I'm at a client site, I will go and implement that feature and make it work on the day at the client site.
That sounds cool. We had one other question. Ravindu again is asking, Do browsers snapshot use embedded or headless browsers?
So they're all considered headless. So those two concepts don't really mesh. So a headless browser is basically where you're automating some browser behind the scenes. I think you're talking about embedded, where I ship a browser with my tooling. So no, it's not embedded. It plugs into either Playwright, Selenium, or the third one, I forget it. But there's three headless browser frameworks that Verify can plug into. And how you ensure that those tools can pull in the correct version of any given browser is different based on those tools. So some of them expect you to manually install them and just exist on the OS. Some of them you can install as part of running the unit test. So in a module initializer, you can say, install these browsers and these versions of these browsers. And other ones are done through, I think, pulled in for NuGet packages. So it depends on the underlying tooling, how you get those browsers. But I've left that to those tools because they're opinionated in their own way. So it's not something I have overridden.
All right. Great. I think we're out of questions. Before we close, I want to share my screen once more, and that is to show you that, and I mentioned it last time already, we have a brand new landing page for this whole series for our OSS Power-Ups. And this is just for you to have a way to go through all the webinars that we already had. In the first section, you will see either the last known episode that we either produced or are going to produce. So whenever I have the next candidate, you will learn about that here, but also on Twitter, of course, and on our blog. Also, you have our previous guests so far. So you see we had Jeremy here, Dennis, Bastian, Dylan and Kai, and Andreas. That was last time. A bit of what we are doing for .NET open source ecosystem. So if you're a maintainer of a project, then this program, we actually, because it takes also some effort, well, quite a lot of effort also, we can't support every project, but we do support probably every project with our open source licenses. So there's also a link for you to apply, so you can get all the necessary tools for maintaining your project. This is the three ways how we support in this series. Yeah, and a bit of background for the plugins, and of course more background on the open source sustainability issue. I really like this episode. Another colleague of mine is holding these episodes, JetBrains Connect, and I can really recommend if you haven't seen it to watch this episode with Rachel and Aaron. All right, I think that's it. Let me quickly remove my screen again. Simon, it was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for going to all the effort of writing that extension as well, because I would not have been able to do that. It's just too far outside my comfort zone.
That was absolutely my pleasure. I mean, it was really fun doing that. First, it's always, and I can really say for those that are interested and are interested in writing plugins themselves, for me, even as an employee, I also start at the point where I know nothing basically, and I have to dive into some code. Luckily, IDEA also has part of it open source, the community edition, as far as I know, at least, and. Yeah, but if you have questions, we have a plugin developers channel. Simon, meanwhile, is also invited. So if you're interested in developing plugins, just let me know. And yeah, just want to repeat, that was great having you here. You're a great voice for .NET open source, and I hope it stays that way. And I hope you had fun, Simon. I hope the audience had fun. I had fun, I can say for sure. And if you like this format, if you like what we do, then like and subscribe, no matter what channel you're currently watching on. And yeah, we will see in the next episode. So thanks for
thank you.
watching.
Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for coming along. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter is probably the best place to do it. And if you have any other of my projects that you want to see in a similar format, let me know.
All right,
cool.
Then take care, everyone. Bye-bye.